The pumpkin's eyes glowed in the darkness of my front porch, not with a candle, not with a battery-powered light, but with something else entirely. Something that made my neighbor Gerald step backwards so fast he nearly fell off my steps. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, his voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. I stood in my doorway, wrapped in my favorite cardigan, and smiled. "That? Oh, that's just my old pumpkin display, Gerald. The one you've been laughing at for the past 3 weeks. The one you told the entire neighborhood was an embarrassment. The one you said made our street look like a trailer park." The carved pumpkin turned its face toward him, slowly, deliberately, and when it spoke, it used Gerald's own voice. "Look at that sad excuse for a Halloween decoration," it said, repeating the exact words Gerald had used when he stood on my lawn just 5 days ago. "Does she think she's fooling anyone with those pathetic store-bought pumpkins from 10 years ago?" Gerald's face went white, his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The pumpkin continued, still in his voice. "My wife and I have been talking. Someone needs to tell Olivia that her house is bringing down property values. Maybe if she can't afford nice decorations, she should just move somewhere more appropriate for people on fixed incomes." I watched Gerald stumble backward down my porch steps. I did not move to help him. I simply stood there, arms crossed, as the pumpkin cycled through every cruel comment, every snide remark, every nasty word Gerald had said about me over the past month. Sometimes justice does not come from lawyers or policemen. Sometimes it comes from an old woman with a little bit of technical knowledge, a lot of patience, and a very good memory. Let me tell you how we got here. My name is Olivia Richardson and I am 72 years old. I have lived in my house on Maple Grove Lane for 43 years. I moved here with my late husband Robert in 1982, when this neighborhood was just being built, and you could buy a 3-bedroom ranch house for under $80,000. Robert passed away 6 years ago. Heart attack. He was here one morning drinking his coffee and reading the newspaper, and by afternoon he was gone. The doctor said he did not suffer. I am grateful for that. But his absence left a hole in my life that never quite filled back in. We never had children. It was not for lack of trying, we simply were not blessed that way. So when Robert died, I found myself alone in a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. But it was my house. My home. The place where I had built my memories. And I was not about to leave it just because I was alone. I kept myself busy. I volunteered at the library on Tuesdays. I attended my book club every other Thursday. I maintained my garden, though not with the same vigor Robert had shown. He was the gardener in our marriage. I just tried to keep things from dying. For the most part, my neighbors were kind. There was Susan and Tom Martinez across the street. They had lived here almost as long as I had. Their children were grown and gone, scattered across the country with families of their own. We waved to each other, we chatted at the mailbox. We were not close friends, but we were friendly. There was young couple 4 houses down, the Patels, with 2 small children who sometimes sold lemonade on hot summer days. I always bought a cup, even when I was not thirsty. The world needs more children who understand the value of small entrepreneurship. And then there was Gerald and Patricia Hammond. They moved in next door 3 years ago. The house had been empty for nearly a year after old Mr. Morrison died. His children sold it to the Hammonds, who paid cash. I know this because Gerald told me, several times. He seemed very proud of paying cash. Gerald was 65, recently retired from some kind of financial consulting job. Patricia was a few years younger, still working part-time at a boutique in the shopping district downtown. They had money. That much was clear from the beginning. Within 6 months of moving in, they had renovated their entire house, new windows, new roof, new siding. They tore out all of Mr. Morrison's old rose bushes and installed a modern landscape design with decorative grasses and river rocks. They built a pergola in the backyard. They installed landscape lighting that made their house glow like a resort at night. I did not mind any of this. Good for them, I thought. They were investing in their property, making it their own. But then the comments started. It began subtly. Gerald would be outside watering his perfect lawn and he would glance over at my yard. "Looks like you could use some weed control, Olivia," he would call out, his tone friendly enough. I've got the name of a great lawn service if you need it. I would smile and wave. Thank you, Gerald. I'll keep that in mind. But I would not call the lawn service. My lawn was fine. It had a few dandelions. So what? Dandelions are cheerful. Bees like them. The comments became more frequent, more pointed. You know, Olivia, if you ever want to update your shutters, I know a contractor who does excellent work. Those ones you have look pretty faded. Have you thought about replacing your mailbox? The post is looking a little rusty. Your gutters are sagging on the east side. That could cause foundation problems if you don't address it. I am not a fool. I understood what Gerald was really saying. He was saying my house was not good enough, that I was not keeping up with his standards, that my home, which I had loved and maintained for over 4 decades, was somehow an embarrassment to him. Patricia was quieter, but I caught her expressions sometimes. The way her eyes would drift over my property with a look that was not quite disapproval but was not quite acceptance either. She never said anything directly to me. She let Gerald do the talking. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that Gerald was just one of those people who needed everything to be perfect. Some people are like that. It does not make them bad, it just makes them exhausting to be around. But as the months went on, Gerald's comments became less friendly and more critical, less suggestions and more complaints. Last year, when I put up my Christmas lights, Gerald came over to inform me that the neighborhood had certain aesthetic standards, and that my decorations were a bit much. My decorations were 3 strands of white lights along the roofline and a wreath on the door. Nothing excessive, nothing garish. This past spring, he complained to the Homeowners Association about my fence, claiming it was deteriorating and lowering property values. The HOA sent someone to inspect it. The inspector found nothing wrong. The fence was fine. In July, Gerald made a comment about my car. I drive a 2008 Honda Civic. It is reliable. It runs well. It gets me where I need to go. Gerald suggested, loudly enough for several neighbors to hear, that maybe it was time to upgrade to something more appropriate for the neighborhood. I began to realize that Gerald was not just critical, he was cruel, and he seemed to take pleasure in making these little jabs at me, as if my existence somehow offended him. But I am not a confrontational person. I was raised to be polite, to turn the other cheek, to not make waves. So I smiled, and I nodded, and I went about my business. Until Halloween. Conflict. I have always loved Halloween. Even without children of our own, Robert and I used to decorate our house every year. We would carve pumpkins together at the kitchen table, scooping out the seeds and arguing playfully about what designs to carve. We would hand out full-size candy bars to trick-or-treaters. We would sit on the porch and watch the children parade by in their costumes, their parents trailing behind with flashlights and bags. After Robert died, I scaled back. I did not have the energy or the enthusiasm to go all out. But I still put out decorations. I still carved a few pumpkins. I still bought candy. It was my way of holding on to something, of not letting go completely. This year, in early October, I went to my storage shed and pulled out my Halloween decorations. They were the same ones I had been using for years. Plastic pumpkins, a scarecrow, some hay bales, a strand of orange lights. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. But they were mine, and they made me happy. I set everything up on my front porch one Saturday morning. I arranged the hay bales. I positioned the scarecrow. I placed the plastic pumpkins on the steps. Then I went to the store and bought 3 real pumpkins to carve. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, just like I used to do with Robert, and I carved those pumpkins. I gave them traditional jack-o'-lantern faces. Triangle eyes, triangle noses, jagged smiles. Simple, classic, beautiful in their simplicity. I placed them on my porch with battery-operated candles inside. I stepped back and looked at my work. It made me smile. It made me remember better times. It made me feel less alone. The next morning, I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard voices outside. I glanced out the window and saw Gerald standing on his front lawn with another neighbor, Bill Edwards from 2 doors down. They were both looking at my house. I could not hear what they were saying, but I saw Gerald gesture toward my porch. I saw him shake his head. I saw Bill shrug and walk away. I told myself it was nothing. Gerald was always observing, always commenting. I would not let it bother me. But that afternoon, as I was getting my mail, Gerald called out to me from his driveway. "Olivia, got a minute?" I walked over, mail in hand. "What can I do for you, Gerald?" He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I wanted to talk to you about your Halloween decorations." "Oh, what about them?" "Well." He glanced toward my house, then back at me. "They're a little dated, don't you think?" I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice level. "Dated?" "Those plastic pumpkins. That scarecrow. It all looks very 1990s, very discount store. Patricia and I invested in some really high-quality decorations this year. Custom pieces. We're trying to maintain a certain standard on this street, and honestly, your display kind of brings down the overall aesthetic." I stared at him. "My decorations bring down the aesthetic." "I'm not trying to be rude, Olivia. I'm just being honest. Maybe if you don't want to invest in new decorations, you could just keep it simple. Keep it minimal. Less is more, you know?" I felt heat rising in my chest. "Gerald, I've been decorating this house for Halloween for over 40 years. These decorations have sentimental value to me." He sighed as if I were a child who was not understanding a simple concept. "Sentimental value doesn't really matter when it comes to property values, Olivia. We all need to think about the neighborhood as a whole." I did not trust myself to respond, so I simply turned and walked back to my house. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. Over the next week, I noticed Gerald making more comments. He said something to Susan Martinez. I saw them talking, saw him pointing at my house. Susan looked uncomfortable and ended the conversation quickly. He made a comment to the mail carrier. I heard him as I was taking out my trash. "Yeah, some people just don't keep up with the times," he said loudly enough for me to hear. Then, 5 days before Halloween, Gerald held a small gathering at his house. Just a few neighbors. Wine and appetizers on his back patio. I was not invited. That did not bother me. But I could hear them talking. My bedroom window faces their patio and sound carries. I heard Gerald's voice clearly. "Look at that sad excuse for a Halloween decoration," he said. "Does she think she's fooling anyone with those pathetic store-bought pumpkins from 10 years ago?" There was some polite laughter. Not much. Most people sounded uncomfortable. Gerald continued. "My wife and I have been talking. Someone needs to tell Olivia that her house is bringing down property values. Maybe if she can't afford nice decorations, she should just move somewhere more appropriate for people on fixed incomes." I stood by my window in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to this man mock me, belittle me, suggest that I should move from the home I had lived in for 43 years because my Halloween decorations were not expensive enough for his standards. And something inside me shifted. I am a patient woman, I am a kind woman, but I am not a doormat, and I decided, standing in my dark bedroom listening to Gerald's cruel words, that I was done being polite. The next morning I started planning. Turning point. I did not sleep well that night. Gerald's words echoed in my mind. The laughter of the neighbors, even though it was uncomfortable and sparse, bothered me. The fact that Gerald felt entitled to comment on my home, my choices, my life, bothered me even more. But more than bothered, I felt something else. Determination. I am not a vindictive person by nature. I believe in kindness and forgiveness. But I also believe in standing up for yourself, in showing people that their cruelty has consequences, not violent consequences, not illegal consequences, but consequences nonetheless. I got out of bed around 5 in the morning, made myself a cup of tea, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I am old-fashioned that way. When I need to think, I write things down with pen and paper. At the top of the page I wrote, "What does Gerald care about most?" The answer was obvious: appearances, status, how things looked to other people. Gerald was a man who measured his worth by external standards, by how his house looked, by what his neighbors thought, by maintaining an image of success and sophistication. I wrote, "What bothers him about my decorations? That they are old, that they are simple, that they do not match his expensive curated aesthetic. Then I wrote, what would make an impact? I stared at that question for a long time. I could simply ignore him. I could take down my decorations and give him the satisfaction of thinking he had won. I could confront him directly, though I knew that would lead nowhere. Men like Gerald do not respond to confrontation from people they consider beneath them. No. I needed something else. Something clever. Something that would make him understand in a way he could not ignore that his words had consequences. That is when the idea came to me. I have a background in technology. This surprises some people when they learn it. They see a 72-year-old woman and assume I am technologically illiterate. But I worked as a computer programmer for 30 years. I started in the early days of personal computing, back when we used punch cards and mainframes. I adapted as technology evolved. I learned new languages, new systems. I retired in 2012, but I kept up with developments. I took online courses. I read articles. I stayed current. And I knew exactly how to use that knowledge. I spent that entire day researching. I looked up voice recording devices, motion sensors, programmable microcontrollers, Bluetooth speakers, things that were small enough to hide inside a carved pumpkin, but powerful enough to do what I needed. The plan formed in my mind piece by piece. I would wire one of my pumpkins with technology that would allow it to record audio and play it back when motion was detected. I would capture Gerald's exact words, his exact tone, his exact cruelty, and I would have the pumpkin repeat those words back to him when he came near. It was perfect. It was poetic. It was justice. That afternoon, I drove to an electronics store across town. I did not want to risk running into anyone I knew. I bought a small Raspberry Pi computer, a motion sensor, a high-quality microphone, a small Bluetooth speaker and a portable battery pack. The young man at the counter looked surprised when I knew exactly what I needed. Working on a project? He asked. I smiled sweetly. Just a little something for Halloween. Back at home, I cleared my dining room table and laid out all my supplies. It had been a few years since I had done any serious programming, but the skills came back quickly. Muscle memory. Mental muscle memory. I spent the next 2 days setting everything up. I programmed the Raspberry Pi to record audio continuously when activated. I wired the motion sensor to trigger playback when someone approached. I tested the speaker to make sure it was loud enough but not too loud. I did not want to disturb the entire neighborhood, just Gerald. The hardest part was capturing his voice. I needed recordings of him saying those cruel things. Fortunately, I did not have to wait long. Gerald seemed incapable of keeping his opinions to himself. 2 days before Halloween, I was in my front yard pretending to adjust my decorations. I had positioned my phone, set to record, in the scarecrow's pocket. The microphone was pointed toward Gerald's driveway. Sure enough, Gerald came outside with his trash. He saw me and could not resist. Still sticking with the bargain basement look, I see, he called out. I did not respond, just kept adjusting the hay bales. He walked closer. You know, Olivia, I've been talking to some of the neighbors. We're all a little concerned about the appearance of the street. Your house is starting to look like it's stuck in a time warp. I turned to face him. Is that right? It's nothing personal. It's just that when someone doesn't maintain proper standards, it affects everyone's property values. Maybe you should consider simplifying, or maybe even think about whether this neighborhood is still the right fit for you. There it was. Recorded, clear as day. I'll take that under consideration, Gerald, I said calmly. He nodded, satisfied with himself, and went back to his house. That evening I transferred the recording to my computer. I edited it, cleaned it up, made sure every word was crystal clear. Then I loaded it onto the Raspberry Pi inside my pumpkin. I carved a new pumpkin specifically for this purpose. I made the face more elaborate, more detailed, more memorable. I hollowed it out carefully, making sure there was enough room for all the electronics. I positioned everything inside, tested it multiple times, and sealed it up. The pumpkin sat on the edge of my porch, closest to Gerald's property, waiting. Halloween night arrived. Revenge. Halloween evening was cool and clear. Perfect weather for trick-or-treaters. I had bought extra candy this year. I wanted everything to appear normal, happy, festive. I positioned myself in my living room where I could see out the front window. I had a clear view of my porch and Gerald's house next door. The trick-or-treaters started arriving around 6 o'clock. Little princesses and superheroes and zombies climbed my porch steps. I opened the door with a smile, dropped candy into their bags, complimented their costumes. The children thanked me politely. The parents smiled and waved. Each time someone approached my porch, I held my breath, wondering if the motion sensor would trigger. But I had calibrated it carefully. It only activated for someone approaching from the side where Gerald's property line was, not from the front walkway. Around 7:30, as the sky was darkening and the street lights were coming on, I saw Gerald and Patricia leaving their house. They were dressed up, not in costumes, but in nice clothes, probably heading to some Halloween party for adults, some sophisticated gathering where they would drink wine and talk about property values and home renovations. They walked down their driveway toward their car. Gerald paused and looked over at my house. Even from my window, I could see the disdainful expression on his face. He said something to Patricia. She glanced at my house and shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. But Gerald was not done. He walked over to the property line, stood there looking at my decorations. Then he stepped onto my lawn. He walked right up to my porch steps, stood there examining my pumpkins. My heart was pounding. He was so close. Just a few more steps. Patricia called out from the driveway, "Gerald, come on, we're going to be late." "Just a second," he called back. "I want to see something." He climbed one step, then another. The motion sensor range was about 6 feet. He was at 8 feet, 7 feet, 6 feet. The pumpkin's eyes lit up. Gerald froze. The pumpkin turned slightly on its base. I had rigged it with a small motor that allowed minimal rotation, just enough to make it look like it was turning its head. Then it spoke, in Gerald's voice. "Look at that sad excuse for a Halloween decoration." Gerald stumbled backward. His eyes went wide. The pumpkin continued. "Does she think she's fooling anyone with those pathetic store-bought pumpkins from 10 years ago?" "What the hell?" Gerald whispered. I opened my front door and stepped out onto the porch. I was calm. Completely calm. "Hello, Gerald," I said pleasantly. "Happy Halloween." The pumpkin kept talking. "My wife and I have been talking. Someone needs to tell Olivia that her house is bringing down property values. Maybe if she can't afford nice decorations, she should just move somewhere more appropriate for people on fixed incomes." Gerald's face went from shocked to pale to red. What is that?" I crossed my arms and leaned against my doorframe. "That's just my old pumpkin display, Gerald. The one you've been criticizing for weeks. I decided to give it an upgrade. Make it more interactive. Bring it into the current decade." The pumpkin cycled to the next recording. "Still sticking with the bargain basement look, I see. Then, your house is starting to look like it's stuck in a time warp. And finally, maybe you should consider simplifying. Or maybe even think about whether this neighborhood is still the right fit for you." Patricia had walked over from the driveway. She stood at the bottom of my porch steps, her hand over her mouth, staring at the pumpkin that was speaking in her husband's voice. By this time, several neighbors had noticed the commotion. Susan Martinez from across the street, the Patels from down the block, even Bill Edwards. They stood on the sidewalk, watching. The pumpkin finished its cycle and went silent. Its glowing eyes dimmed. It sat there, just a carved pumpkin again, innocent, harmless. Gerald found his voice. This is harassment. This is some kind of invasion of privacy." I smiled. "Is it? I recorded you saying these things on my property, Gerald. Or on the public sidewalk. Nothing private about that. I just thought since you had so many opinions about my decorations, you might like to hear them played back. For reflection." "You can't do this," he sputtered. "Actually, I can. I checked with a lawyer friend. As long as I'm on my property and you're in a public space or on my property, I'm well within my rights to record our conversations. Especially since you made no attempt to keep your voice down. You wanted people to hear your opinions, Gerald. So I'm just helping you share them. Patricia touched Gerald's arm. Gerald, let's just go. But Gerald was not ready to leave. His face was red with anger and embarrassment. You're crazy. You're a crazy old woman. I did not flinch. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just someone who's tired of being disrespected in her own home. You've spent months making comments about my house, about my car, about my decorations, about me. You've suggested that I don't belong in this neighborhood, that I should move. Well, Gerald, I'm not moving. I'm staying right here in the house I've owned for 43 years. And I'm going to keep decorating it however I want. Susan Martinez stepped forward from the sidewalk. Gerald, is that really what you said? That Olivia should move? Gerald spun to face her. That's not, it's out of context. It sounded pretty clear to me, Susan said. Her voice was cool, disapproving. Bill Edwards shook his head and walked away. The Patels looked at each other and then at Gerald with expressions of disappointment. Patricia tugged on Gerald's arm more insistently. We need to go, now. Gerald pointed at me, his hand was shaking. This isn't over. I met his eyes steadily. Yes, Gerald, it is. They left. Patricia practically dragged him to their car. I watched them drive away, Gerald's face still red in the glow of the street lights. The neighbors lingered for a moment. Susan walked up to my porch. I'm sorry, Olivia, she said quietly. I had no idea he was saying things like that. It's not your fault, Susan. Still, that was uncalled for. You have every right to decorate your house however you want. She paused, then smiled. And that pumpkin? That was brilliant. I laughed. It felt good to laugh. Thank you. The other neighbors dispersed. The Patels waved to me with new warmth. Even the trick-or-treaters who arrived after that seemed to approach my porch with more enthusiasm, having heard something interesting happen there. I spent the rest of the evening handing out candy with a lightness in my chest I had not felt in months. The pumpkin sat quietly on my porch. Its work was done. Resolution. The next morning I woke up feeling better than I had in a long time. The sun was shining through my bedroom window. Birds were singing in the oak tree in my backyard. The air smelled like autumn leaves and possibility. I made my coffee and sat on my front porch, something I had not done in weeks. I had been avoiding my porch, not wanting to deal with Gerald's stares or comments. But this morning I claimed it back. I watched the neighborhood wake up. People leaving for work. Children waiting for the school bus. The normal rhythm of a weekday morning. Gerald's car was in his driveway, but I did not see him. Or Patricia. Their curtains were drawn. Around 10 o'clock, Susan Martinez came over with a coffee cake. I made extra, she said, handing it to me. Thought you might like some. We sat on my porch and talked. Really talked. She told me that she had noticed Gerald's behavior over the past year but had not wanted to get involved. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, she said. But hearing him last night, hearing the way he talked about you, I realized he's just a bully. Yes, I agreed. He is. Tom and I talked about it. We're not going to socialize with him anymore. We don't want people like that in our lives. I felt a wave of gratitude. Thank you, Susan. That means a lot. Over the next few days, several other neighbors stopped by. The Patels brought me homemade samosas and told me they thought my Halloween decorations were charming. Bill Edwards apologized for not saying something sooner when Gerald made comments. I should have stood up for you, he said. I assured him it was okay, that I did not hold anyone responsible for Gerald's behavior except Gerald himself. But the most interesting development came 4 days after Halloween. I was in my kitchen when I heard a car pull into Gerald's driveway. I glanced out the window and saw a real estate agent's sign being planted in their front lawn. For sale. I stood at my window, coffee cup in hand, and stared at that sign. They were moving. Part of me felt victorious. Part of me felt sad. Not for Gerald, but for the whole situation. For the fact that it had come to this. That afternoon, Patricia knocked on my door. She looked tired, strained. "Olivia," she said when I opened the door, "can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course." We sat in my living room. She perched on the edge of my sofa, her hands folded in her lap. "I want to apologize," she said. "For Gerald. For everything he said. For how he treated you." I nodded. "Thank you." I knew he was being critical. I knew he was obsessive about the neighborhood looking perfect. But I didn't realize how cruel he was being until I heard that recording. Hearing his own words played back like that. She trailed off. It was eye-opening. "Is that why you're moving?" She sighed. "Partly. But mostly because Gerald can't handle living here anymore. He's humiliated. Everyone saw what happened. Everyone knows what he said. He can't walk outside without feeling like people are judging him." "They probably are," I said honestly. "I know." She looked at me with sad eyes. "He brought it on himself. I told him months ago to leave you alone, to stop making comments. But he wouldn't listen. He was so convinced that he was right. That maintaining property values was more important than being kind." We sat in silence for a moment. "I'm sorry you're moving because of this," I said. And I meant it. Patricia had not been cruel. She had just been married to someone who was. "Don't be. Honestly, I think it's good for us. Good for him. Maybe this will teach him something. Maybe it won't. But either way, I can't be around someone who treats people the way he treated you." My eyebrows rose. "Are you separating?" "I don't know yet. We're going to counseling. We're going to try. But I've made it clear that things need to change. That he needs to change." She stood to leave. At the door, she turned back to me. "What you did with that pumpkin," she said. "It was brilliant, and deserved. I hope you know that." After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about consequences and kindness and the fine line between standing up for yourself and seeking revenge. I decided that what I did was not revenge. Revenge would have been cruel for cruelty's sake. What I did was justice. I held up a mirror and made Gerald see himself clearly, made him hear his own words from an outside perspective, made him understand that his behavior had consequences. The house next door sold within 3 weeks. A young couple with a baby moved in 2 months later. They introduced themselves on their first day. They complimented my garden. They asked if I needed anything. They were kind. I brought them a casserole and a welcome card. The neighborhood felt lighter after Gerald left, warmer, more like the community it had been when Robert and I first moved here. I kept my Halloween pumpkin, the special one with all the technology inside. I preserved it, dried it out carefully. It sits on a shelf in my garage now, a reminder. Not a reminder of revenge, but a reminder that I have a voice, that I deserve respect, that being kind does not mean being a doormat. Moral. I have learned something important in my 72 years on this earth, something I wish I had understood earlier, something I hope other women, especially women my age, will take to heart. Being nice is not the same as being weak. For so much of my life I was taught to be polite, to not make waves, to accept criticism gracefully, to turn the other cheek. These are not bad lessons. There is value in kindness and patience and forgiveness. But there is also value in standing up for yourself, in saying enough, in showing people that their cruelty will not be tolerated. We live in a world that often dismisses older women. We are invisible. We are expected to be quiet and grateful and undemanding. We are expected to accept whatever scraps of respect people choose to give us. But we do not have to accept that. We have lived long lives. We have experience and wisdom and skills that young people do not have. We have survived challenges and losses and disappointments. We are strong in ways that are not always visible. And we deserve respect, not because of how our houses look or how much money we have or whether our decorations meet someone else's standards, but because we are human beings. because we have value, because we exist. Gerald thought he could bully me into submission. He thought his opinions mattered more than my feelings. He thought property values were more important than human dignity. He was wrong. I did not hurt him. I did not damage his property. I did not spread lies about him. I simply held up a mirror and made him see himself. I used his own words against him. I showed him that cruelty has consequences. And in doing so, I reclaimed something important: my sense of self, my confidence, my home. My house on Maple Grove Lane is not perfect. My decorations are not expensive or elaborate. My car is old. My fence has a few weathered spots. But it is mine. It is my home. It is where I have lived and loved and grieved and grown. And no one, not Gerald or anyone else, has the right to make me feel ashamed of it. If you are reading this or listening to this story and you have felt dismissed or belittled or disrespected because of your age or your appearance or your circumstances, please remember this: you matter. Your feelings matter. Your home matters. Your life matters. You do not have to accept cruelty. You do not have to be silent. Stand up for yourself. Use your voice. Use your intelligence. Use your intelligence. Use your experience. And if someone tries to make you feel small, find a way to remind them that you are anything but. Sometimes justice comes quietly. Sometimes it comes with a whisper or a clever trick or a carved pumpkin that remembers everything. But it comes. And when it does, savor it. Not with bitterness or ongoing anger, but with the satisfaction of knowing that you stood up for yourself, that you took back your power, that you reminded the world that you are here and you matter and you will not be pushed aside. I am Olivia Richardson. I am 72 years old. I live in a house with store-bought Halloween decorations and an old car and a garden that has a few weeds. And I am proud of it. Proud of myself. Proud of the life I have built. Gerald moved away. But I am still here. And I am not going anywhere. My neighbor laughed at my old pumpkin display, until it came alive and remembered every cruel word he said. Epilogue. Spring came to Maple Grove Lane like a gentle promise. The harsh winter had melted away, and now the neighborhood bloomed with daffodils and tulips and the soft green of new grass. I stood in my front yard with a trowel in my hand and dirt under my fingernails. My garden beds needed attention after the long winter. Robert always said that spring was the season of second chances, a time to plant new things and watch them grow. The young couple next door, Emma and David Chen, were outside with their baby. Little Sophie was 9 months old now, and she sat in a blanket on their lawn, grabbing at grass and squealing with delight. Emma waved to me. "Good morning, Olivia." "Good morning," I called back. David walked over to the property line. "Olivia, we're planning to put in some flower beds along the fence. Emma wants roses. Do you have any advice? We heard you used to have beautiful gardens." I smiled. It had been years since anyone asked me for gardening advice. Roses need good drainage and at least 6 hours of sun. That spot should be perfect. I can give you the name of a good nursery if you'd like. That would be great. Maybe you could come with us? Help us pick out the right varieties? Something warm settled in my chest. I would love that. As David went back to his family, I returned to my weeding, but I was not alone for long. Susan Martinez came over with her husband Tom. They were planning a neighborhood barbecue for Memorial Day and wanted to make sure I would come. "Of course," I said. "Should I bring my potato salad?" "Yes. Everyone's been asking about it since last year." The Patels stopped by later that afternoon. Their oldest daughter had a school project about local history, and they wondered if I would be willing to be interviewed. "You've lived here longer than almost anyone," Mrs. Patel said. "We thought you'd have wonderful stories to share." I agreed immediately. The idea that my memories had value, that someone wanted to hear about the history I had lived through, made me feel seen in a way I had not felt in years. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. The same neighborhood I had watched for 43 years. But somehow it felt different now. Better. Not because Gerald was gone, though I would be lying if I said his absence did not make things more peaceful, but because something had shifted in me, something fundamental. I had stood up for myself. I had used my intelligence and my skills to defend my dignity, and in doing so I had reminded myself and everyone around me that I was not invisible, not powerless, not someone to be dismissed. The pumpkin incident, as it came to be known in the neighborhood, had become something of a legend. People still talked about it months later. Some found it funny, some found it inspiring. A few thought I had gone too far, though they never said so to my face. But most people understood what it really was: a boundary, a line in the sand, a declaration that kindness does not mean weakness and politeness does not mean submission. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message from my book club. They wanted to know if I could host next month's meeting. Of course I could. I loved hosting. I loved hosting. I had just been waiting to be asked. Another message came through. This one from a woman named Margaret who lived 3 streets over. We had met at the library. She was 75 and recently widowed. She had heard about what happened with Gerald and wanted to know if we could meet for coffee. She said she was dealing with a difficult neighbor of her own and wanted advice. I smiled and typed back a response. Coffee sounds wonderful. How about Tuesday at 10? Sometimes standing up for yourself does more than just solve your own problem. It gives other people permission to stand up for themselves too. It shows them that they do not have to accept mistreatment, that they have power even when they feel powerless. As darkness settled over the neighborhood and the street lights flickered on one by one, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago. Quiet, accommodating, trying so hard not to make waves that I let myself be swept away by other people's currents. I thought about the woman I was now. Still kind, still compassionate, but stronger, more certain, more willing to take up space in the world. The change had not come easily. It had required courage. It had required creativity. It had required me to step outside my comfort zone and do something bold. But it had been worth it. My house still had the same faded shutters, the same rusty mailbox post, the same old car in the driveway. None of the external things had changed. But everything had changed. Because I had changed. I had remembered something important, something I had forgotten in the years after Robert died, in the loneliness and the quiet and the slowly shrinking sense of self that can happen when you live alone and the world tells you that you matter less and less. I had remembered that I am Olivia Richardson, that I am intelligent and capable and worthy of respect, that my home is my castle, and no one has the right to make me feel ashamed of it. That my life, even in its ordinariness, has value and meaning and beauty. A car pulled into the Chen's driveway next door. Emma and David returned from an evening out. They waved to me as they carried sleeping Sophie into the house. Good neighbors, kind neighbors, the kind of neighbors who made a street feel like a community. I finished my iced tea and stood up, ready to go inside for the night, but I paused at my front door and looked back at my porch, at the space where the pumpkin had sat last Halloween, the pumpkin that had spoken truth to power in the most unexpected way. I had already decided what I would do this coming Halloween. I would decorate again, maybe even more than before. I would put out my old plastic pumpkins and my scarecrow and my hay bales, and I would add something new, something special, something that would make me smile every time I looked at it. Because this was my home, my space, my right. And I would never again let anyone make me feel like I did not belong here. As I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not just contentment, not just relief, but joy. Pure, simple, uncomplicated joy. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. The kind that comes from standing up for yourself and discovering that you are stronger than you ever imagined. The kind that comes from turning pain into power, cruelty into courage, and a simple carved pumpkin into a symbol of justice. I turned off the porch light and headed to my kitchen to make dinner. Tomorrow I would call Margaret and arrange that coffee date. I would help Emma and David plan their rose garden. I would continue living my life on my terms, in my home, in my neighborhood. And if anyone else tried to tell me I did not belong here, well, I still had that pumpkin in my garage. And I knew exactly how to use it. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. You are never too old to demand respect. You are never too old to remind the world that you matter. May you find the courage to carve your own pumpkin, whatever form it takes. May you speak your truth with confidence. And may you never forget that kindness and strength are not opposites. They are partners, and together they can change everything. This is Olivia Richardson, reminding you that justice sometimes comes with a jack-o'-lantern smile.